to the place where singles shine, celebrating life, divine by design, and faith and love, we intertwine. Route 77, where your journey's prime.
Welcome to the Route 77 podcast. Today we're diving into a topic that affects us all, conflict. We are going to unpack the complex world of conflict management. Specifically, we'll explore the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, a tool that outlines 5 distinct ways to handle conflict. Whether you're dealing with disagreements at home, at work, or anywhere in between, understanding these strategies can be a game changer. This is part 1 of a 2-part series, so let's get started and learn how to manage conflicts more effectively. Welcome to the Route 77 podcast. I am your host, Natasha, and I am here with Monique.
Hello.
And David.
Hello.
And I want to get into an argument with both of you.
Oh,
no.
I'm probably not going to be much of an argumenter today because I don't have a whole heck of a lot left in me.
At the very least, I want to talk about conflict and how to handle conflict, because whether you're single or not, this applies to everyone. And it's what I did my most recent school course on, so it's the freshest thing in my mind. And while it's not my forte, conflict management, it's something that I'm trying to get better at.
All right.
And I'm basing it on a specific conflict management test that I had to do for my course called Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. Sounds complex, but essentially you go through and you answer all the questions, and they tell you which of the 5 conflict handling modes that you incorporate and which ones you avoid and which ones, like how the positives and negatives in each one. And I think it's a good foundation for just understanding different ways that we have conflict and the positives and the negatives that can come from that. Maybe I'll start with the ones that I use the most.
Ready?
I understand them the most. But we can go through all 5 of them. So the 5 are accommodating, avoiding, compromising, competing, and collaborating. And what I liked about the way that they discussed it is that none of these are completely negative. They're just tools in a toolbox that should be used equally. But people tend to have their favorite tools and ones that they avoid using. And so they try to encourage you to understand this about yourself and to learn how to use the tools that you're not used to using, and maybe put your tools that you like using aside when it's not the right tool for the job. We can start, for me, accommodating was my highest. It was like I was in the 100 percentile. Like nobody who did this test had outranked me in ability to accommodate.
And so what does that mean, accommodating?
So I'll read what the TKI report defines them as. So accommodating is unassertive and cooperative. Accommodating is unassertive and cooperative, the opposite of competing. When accommodating, an individual neglects his or her own concerns to satisfy the concerns of the other person. There is an element of self-sacrifice in this mode. Accommodating might take the form of selfless generosity or charity, obeying another person's order when you would prefer not to, or yielding to another's point of view. And again, what I liked about this test is that it talks about not only that if you're overusing it or stuff, but they actually talk about how it can be used in a positive way. The second one that we'll talk about, avoiding, is one that I always thought was just completely bad all of the time, even though I use it. But it talks about the positive things about those ways of conflict management. And we could also look at it in regards to the Bible. We are encouraged to look for accommodating, where it talks about in Matthew 5 verse 9, there it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Let me see if I can find it. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And we think that, this sounds like a one we should do all the time. And as a style, TKI says that frequent use of accommodating may also be a part of an accommodating style that I have developed to deal with conflict. So accommodators tend to see conflicts as social, emotional issues to be settled with support and sensitivity. They often believe in the golden rule, do unto others, and believe that generosity will eventually be rewarded in kind. They regard coworkers as friends, people to be supported and looked after, and value support, generosity, goodwill, and team cohesiveness. They often see compassion and friendship as more important than the minor issues involved in most conflicts. Accommodators will help coworkers meet their concerns for the sake of the coworker and to help build cohesiveness and goodwill. All these things sound like positives to me, right?
Yep.
What
Yep.
about you, David?
So
What do you think?
so when is it like, so those are the positive qualities of it, but what are like the negative?
So here it says questions to ask. The danger in any style is that you may use your preferred mode out of habit, even when it's not the most appropriate. There's a good chance I'm overusing. There are some people are like me in this are over conflict and this conflict mode and underusing others. So signs of signs of overuse. Do you feel that your ideas and concerns sometimes don't get the attention they deserve? Deferring too much to the concerns of others can deprive you of influence, respect, and recognition. It can also deprive the organization of your potential contributions. And is discipline lax? Although discipline for its own sake may be of little use, some rules, procedures, and assignments are crucial and need to be enforced. Accommodating on these issues may harm you, others, or the organization.
Does it say in what scenario would be considered over accommodating? Because because Genesis 45, when Joseph is confronted by his brothers, betrayal to him, and yet he puts God's plan, God's purpose before that. That's like a massive accommodation
Yeah.
on his part. So what's the actual, what would it look like to be over accommodating if Joseph is accommodating the betrayal of his own family, his own brothers?
Yeah, like for me, I tend to accommodate like to the point of denying even myself opinions, even within my own self. Like, so I won't even have my own opinion on things, basically, or I avoid having an opinion even within myself so I don't disappoint myself. But also, like it mentions, if you overuse this, then like how do you enforce discipline? Like as a Taekwondo instructor, if I'm constantly accommodating, say, kids when they get disruptive and stuff, instead of actually setting rules and boundaries and
Like
things,
vanilla?
yeah, then it becomes an issue because then you're just trying to pacify everybody. And so how do you and also what I thought is interesting is it can also deprive you of influence, respect, and recognition. While recognition may not be super important to people, there should be a level of respect. And also if you don't influence anything because you're constantly just deferring to the other person. And what I find interesting, like for me, my least used one, which I think is more of they say that competitiveness is actually the opposite of this, but I think actually the other one that I least use is actually more, and it's all collaborative. Like by constantly just accommodating and just going with the flow and letting other people do what they say, then I actually don't work well with others in the sense that I contribute my thoughts and ideas and expertise and things that I could bring that are positive to a situation because I'm just like, you know what, let's just go with what they want to do. And so we might end up doing something that isn't as beneficial because I haven't actually added anything to it because I've just accommodated them instead of actually collaborated and given because even if you're pushing back on things, that can be a positive. That's why debates, like real debates, can be positive because you're actually pushing back on things with people in a positive way, in a way that can help. So you're in a debate, like you're usually going against an opposing view. And yet what you're trying to do is less of what social media tries or whatever society tries to say about owning or destroying the other person, and more like developing. You're actually trying to develop a dialogue so people can actually think through things by the way that you push back at each other on that topic. Does that make sense?
Yep. So what are some of the signs that indicate that you might be over accommodating?
I think just
I know what?
what's one? You
Frustration,
yes.
because you're constantly giving in to the other person or whatever the situation, and you're neglecting your own thoughts and feelings about the situation. Because you're neglecting yourself, your own self is starting to feel frustrated because it doesn't like to be neglected.
Yeah. And I can say too from personal experience that it actually years and years of doing this, I created a very big anger within myself that I didn't even understand or I wasn't able to understand or even know why it was there. It was just I was just labeled as by people as having an anger issue. But
Oh,
then when I through counseling, and again, I wasn't specifically dealing with this like you're dealing with this an accommodating style, therefore you must do this. It was just like my counselor was just dealing with the fact that I was constantly just deferring to everyone else's opinion on everything, and it was creating like this resentment and anger within me that I didn't know I was doing. And after we came to the point where, you know what, like even admitting to myself, like, hey, you're allowed to have an opinion on this. You're allowed to say something like, and when people say, "Oh, where do you wanna go have dinner?" And I can say, "Boston Pizza." And even if we don't all go to Boston Pizza, it's okay, but I actually gave my opinion, and that's allowed. And so it wasn't just because a lot of times I'm just like, "Yeah, wherever," and just let it and then inside, I was denying myself even within myself, I was denying myself opinion. And so that created like an unintended resentment and anger that again, like I said, I was labeled by, like, my parents and people, like, as having an anger issue, and so I think it was just, like, a lot of things building up, like, with teasing in school, essentially, if you show that you like or dislike something, then that's used against you, and then the whole idea of with my dad's worldview of the Bible verse talking about living at peace with everyone, live it like as much as you're able, live at peace with everyone. It was like just basically, unless it was a sin issue, you just let people do what they want and don't like rock the boat in any way by even essentially putting out an opinion that might create division. Like all those things over time just developed that extreme anger within me that just through counseling, again, not labeling it as this is how I was dealing with it, but actually understanding I was denying even myself an opinion, and that's what was
right.
creating this lifelong kind of building up. And after the counselor was just always asking me how I felt about things, and it was just like to actually be able to talk about how I felt about things, then it helped. I don't have that anger within me anymore, and I don't just have an anger issue. I don't was able to deal with the root of that anger issue, so to speak.
I feel
But yeah.
lonely out there, Amber.
So I think there are verses too, and I'm not saying this is specifically you, Natasha, but I think it's a good warning for people. Proverbs 25:26 says, "Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked." And what this is practically saying is that in the danger of compromising one's moral stance or accommodating for these things, we also at the same time risk endangering the message of Christ. We're too willing to accommodate for people in regards so that do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. And like I said with my dad, it was like unless it's a sin issue where you stand firm, but if you just completely embrace the accommodating style, that sin issue, you don't necessarily stand up for that. Or what he meant was like you stand for truth and then you don't back down from that. But one, if you're constantly developing an accommodating style in every other part of your life, it becomes very difficult to stand up for truth because you haven't developed that any other style in conflict. But also you might actually fail to actually like state truth ever because you're just so much embracing the like accommodating other people's views and moral and ethical beliefs. And I think while we're called to allow people to have free will and autonomy so that they're allowed to believe what they want to believe, we still should be standing firm and stating truth in the way when it's needed.
They always say, speak the truth in love.
Yeah, that's always the hard part, finding out exactly how to do that.
It is, because how do you know what a loving statement is when part of you is feeling really angry and doesn't want to feel? I'm not feeling very loving right now and I just want to tear a strip off you.
Yeah.
That's not good.
In a sense, too, I wouldn't emphasize loving to be more of a statement or your words, but like an action, as Jesus depicted many times over.
Oh, and what do you mean?
You can say many things that may infer love, but essentially that necessarily doesn't mean that you actually love that person or love that thing or in general. What ends up happening is that in order to depict love, in spite of your frustration and anger, you do some action, like a physical action, hugging or sacrificing your time to someone that would represent more love than simply a statement or words.
But that for me, it kind of says something different. It's more, you can be angry at somebody, but don't sin, which means don't berate them. Don't talk down to them. Be respectful in how you voice your displeasure or whatever it is that you're trying to talk about, and not get into a shouting match. Always keep your voice even and calm and just state why you feel the way you do. And I think they say that a lot of times when you talk about if you speak of it in your own experience, I feel like I'm being attacked rather than, or I feel like I'm not being heard, because they can't dispute your feelings because they're your feelings, although some people might. No? Yes?
Yeah, and I think different people show this in different ways too.
Yeah.
And to different degrees. Like for me, I scored so high on this that it's the one I use absolutely most, which when you look at my background of trauma through different things and the way that the worldview I grew up in, that it makes sense of why I developed this as my basically sole or top two things that I use. But it doesn't make it good that I only use these. But again, I think people are on a different spectrum of how they use it. They might use it occasionally. They might use it solely. They might never use it. And so, for example, one of the things they say, if the signs of underuse of this is having trouble building goodwill, being viewed as unreasonable, having trouble admitting when one is wrong, failing to recognize legitimate exceptions to the rules, and refusing to give up. And it's to say that refusing to give up is like a bad thing, but there's certain times I think when you do leave things alone, or you should stop things.
Yeah. When it gets to the point where you're yelling at each other and you're about to destroy the relationship, it's time to take a step back.
Yeah. And this is how you can say, like, there's times to use this. Like you can use a hammer when it's time to hammer in a nail. But using a screwdriver to hammer in a nail isn't it might
It's not gonna
eventually
work.
not going to work well.
No.
It's not designed for that. And so it's good to use this accommodating. Again, it's not a negative thing. It's just a tool that should be used correctly in the right circumstances.
Right.
And there's times to be accommodating. Like we talk about it even within the church. We talk about it with closed hand, open hand, and loose grip issues. Within a church, you might have a loose hand on things like I grew up singing psalms only and having no instruments. Does that mean I should have no dealings whatsoever with any other church that dares to have instruments or sing something other than psalms? Or can I see them as fellow believers that I'm in a church now that does those things, which is fine. Like I'm okay with it. But I'm just saying as an example previous to that. But if I say there was a church that didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, then that's not a time to accommodate.
No.
and you're not going to like fellowship in a sense with before God with people who don't believe that Jesus is God. Like you
Yeah.
would maybe have a discussion with them or whatever, but it would be a different relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. There are certain salvation issues that we can't back down on, but there are other that are more ambiguous that we really don't know how to.
And
Really
even like
don't know.
if, for example, like if you want to, like the loose grip ones where you're willing to fellowship with them as a sense of yes, you're a fellow believer within the body of Christ, but I'm still going to worship in a church where I have differing views. But then there's things within the church. What if your church members want to use PowerPoint and the other ones don't want any technology within it? But then you can come into a consensus and still worship within the same church community denomination.
Yeah.
And not accommodating could come in there, like going, this is not a sin issue. This is not a truth issue. It's not a doctrinal issue. It's preferential. But you can still come within a denomination and still worship in the stay in the denomination. You don't leave, hopefully, because of that. But there's a change if you can use accommodating within. So there's different variations of it. And yeah, so I don't know. That's how I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. But that could, and it's not just with accommodating that we have to have this with. This is one of your big ones. And I think that one of the reasons why a lot of people fall back on this one, a lot of times is because of fear. If you
And not wanting to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. If the other person is prone to being angry all the time, no matter what you say, you're probably going to be less likely to say anything and just be accommodating because that's the way to keep the peace.
It's the safest way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so another one that my second, here goes the dog. My second most used one is avoiding. Avoiding is unassertive and uncooperative. When avoiding, an individual does not immediately pursue his or her own concerns or those of the other person. He or she does not address the conflict. Avoiding might take the form of diplomatically sidestepping an issue, postponing an issue until a better time, or simply withdrawing from a threatening situation. This is my second most used. I need my hand. Zeus is not letting me flip pages here. What's going on?
Your elbow way up in the air. Just so you know, that's another way you're very accommodating.
Yes. Just dealing with him.
You let the dog do whatever he wants.
So to avoiding, the uses are when an issue is unimportant or when other more important issues are pressing. When you perceive no chance of satisfying your concerns, for example, when you have low power or you are frustrated by something that would be very difficult to change. When the potential cost of confronting a conflict outweigh the benefits of its resolution. When you need to let people cool down to reduce tensions to a productive level and to regain perspective and composure. When gathering more information outweighs the advantages of an immediate decision. When others can resolve the issue more effectively. And when the issue seems tangential or symptomatic of another more basic issue. So again, what I loved about this test was that it actually tells you that just because you do something, like people always tell you that you shouldn't avoid the issue. But here it's actually telling you there is a time and place for avoiding. And that is positive. It has, so that's the thing. I don't say that's the only thing I'll take away from this course, but I think that's like the thing that has stuck with me from when I first did this test. And that's just going, hey, this isn't a deep personality flaw. Because I thought avoiding would be because that's the one that people point out the most, right? And so I always considered it something like deeply flawed about me and that had to change and I couldn't quite. And yet it's got its uses.
When you're in an abusive situation, there's times when you really have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I think is those abusive situations, you tend to use accommodation because you cannot completely get out of the situation most of the time. Like you're always with that. If you're in a abusive relationship or you're in school and you're being teased all the time and there's no way, like you become accommodating, which is what I like how I developed it, I think, because you cannot remove yourself from the situation or you are unsure how to. And so you learn how to become safe within that framework.
So would that be more that sounds like it would be more towards accommodating than avoiding, because you can't avoid a situation like that. I feel like,
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying,
and
like,
I've experienced
that's what I'm saying, like,
it,
so
but
accommodating is developed like that, and I thought but avoiding, it's a way it's how you get out of it, like, you move away from a situation, and I think when it comes to abuse, it's avoiding is good, but it's not always practical to
Right.
whatever you're going through, especially if you say have kids and then they're
it,
trying to make all these decisions, and so avoiding, but it can be used again with my ex. I have implemented avoidance, which I think is a positive use of it in the sense that I've gone no contact for several years now. And so I think that's a positive use of avoidance because it falls under the thing. I think it's the potential cost of confronting it outweighs the benefits of its resolution. And I think that regardless of, and I think in a sense, there's no chance of satisfying your concerns. There's essentially nothing. It'll be very difficult to change that situation. So there's no point in me remaining in contact with him. And so for me personally, that's I think a healthy use of avoiding conflict with my ex specifically. So and that's just an example. I don't know. I need my hand. I need to switch over here so I can see this.
And how it needs to, that's how it needs to be because he was not a safe person. Or the other one. It's time for Amber's met, so don't mind me.
There's low assertiveness in avoiding and there's low cooperation. So that's, again, it's okay to use it in the right situation. But if you overuse it, then you end up with some issues that never get resolved.
or you end up with greater challenges. Look at Jonah.
Yeah.
Tried to avoid his, and it ended up in a series of events that were probably worse than the initial one.
Yeah. I think avoiding conflict with God is not going to work.
No.
No.
But I think we try to do that a lot with God, with issues that we want to do, but we know we shouldn't. Avoidance can also lead to missed opportunities for personal and relational growth. And it may contradict biblical encouragements to deal with conflicts directly and seek reconciliation, like Matthew 18, when it actually says to go to your brother and all those type of things. Like you could actually should be dealing with these things instead of, again, if you use them in the correct way, then it works, the tool, but it's not one to be just, you're not going to go around hammering everything and can lead to. So it says signs of overuse. Does coordination suffer? Well, because people sometimes have trouble getting your input on issues. You're just like, at those people who, why do we absolutely abhor group projects in school? Because there's always the avoider, right? There's always
Yep.
the person who avoids and you can't find them. Does it sometimes appear that people are walking on eggs? Sometimes a disproportionate amount of energy is devoted to caution and avoiding issues, indicating that those issues need to be faced and resolved. And are decisions on important issues sometimes made by default? So sometimes avoiding means things are going to get decided without you, and that doesn't always mean that's a good thing. Because again, just like accommodating, you could be bringing something positive to the discussion, and you're just basically saying it'll get figured out without me if I don't think about it long enough. And then it can again lead to frustration and resentment of things that come around, but you avoided it. So it's hard. But again, it's good to, is it worth getting into some conflict? Is it better just to avoid? And yes, the answer is yes. Is it, some people are conflict magnets, like my ex, where like it doesn't, they just create conflict for no reason. And is it worth getting into? I think that's what it talks about when it talks about not casting pearls before swine. It's not like it's not always beneficial. Like I talked about debate with accommodating. It's not always beneficial to have a debate if no one's willing to hear either side, or if it's just people talking and yelling over one another.
It's just
then
a useless, yeah.
It's there's a time and a place for things. And sometimes you can speak truth all you want till you're blue in the face, but it's not. Do you think it's beneficial to go into a mosque and just start trying to preach the gospel at the front? I don't think that's the right time and place.
Do you think they'll let you?
So
They'll probably jump on you.
that would pose that would actually be a risk to your life.
Yeah.
Because if you're in front of them in Islamic culture, then you're gonna be considered to be closer to God than closer to Allah.
Yeah.
So it's actually a sign of you being like a scholar or teacher, and it's something that you may not want to actually do.
That's what I say. So it doesn't mean that we should never interact with Muslims or have conversations with them, but sometimes there's a time and a place for it, and there's a time to avoid that conflict that would arise, and there's times to engage with that conflict. And it's the wisdom of understanding. And that's the example I gave was like almost like obvious. It was pretty extreme, but there's much more nuanced times and if our initial gut reaction is always to avoid, then we have to look at it and say, okay, wait, am I just going with my habit? Am I going with fight or flight? Am I fear? Those type of things? Or is this the correct tool to use in this situation? That's just how I was like thinking about it. Next one that in my testing, but in the system was compromising. I have a 41 percentile, so it gets used now and then, not quite half the time. Let me find my examples, my explanation. Compromising, an intermediate in both assertiveness and cooperativeness. When compromising, an individual has the object of finding an expedient, mutually acceptable solution that partially satisfies both parties. Compromising falls on a middle ground between competing and accommodating, giving up more than competing but less than accommodating. Likewise, it addresses an issue more directly than avoiding, but doesn't explore it in as much depth as collaborating. Compromising might mean splitting the difference, exchanging concessions, or seeking a quick middle ground position. And compromise. So its uses are when goals are moderately important, but not worth the effort or the potential disruption involved in using a more assertive modes. When two opponents with equal power are strongly committed to mutually exclusive goals, as in labor management bargaining. When you want to achieve a temporary settlement of a complex issue. When you need to arrive at an expedient solution under time pressure. And as a backup mode when collaboration or competition fails. I think I use it not quite half the time, but I think it's a healthy one. Not that they're all healthy in a way. Again, used in their correct times, it's very healthy. But if you're, for me, so geared towards accommodating, then the compromising wouldn't really happen because I would just be like, okay, whatever the other person wants. That's not really compromising because it's both parties are giving up something for the.
Well, both parties may be giving up something, but it can also be looked upon as some kind of manipulation. And an example of this will be in 1 Samuel 25:18-35, where Abigail is confronted with David's wrath towards her household. And she tries to compromise to avoid bloodshed by trying to persuade him with supplies and material goods. And in a situation like that, it could seem as a viable output depending on how both parties look at it. If both parties are happy with the outcome, then it may be a healthy approach. But I can also see if one party values whatever, for example, in David's case, whatever wrath David had could be seen, he could have saw as a higher value than whatever Abigail was offering to him. So it can be seen also as a manipulation. So I feel like you have to be very careful when it comes to compromise.
Thank you for tuning in to today's discussion on the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. I hope it's given you some insights into different ways to approach conflicts and the benefits of each style. Remember, this is just part 1 of our 2-part series, so be sure to join us next time as we continue to delve deeper into effective conflict resolution strategies. Follow us on social media to share your thoughts and experiences, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, take care, manage those conflicts wisely, and live your single life to its fullest.